On today's show, we're looking at 5 young NHL players who are deserving of much more widespread recognition than they've gotten so far this season, highlighted by Dustin Wolf's Calder-worthy display for the Calgary Flames.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian Hyde, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, and on today's episode, we're going to be diving into the games of 5 young NHL players. These are all rookies or sophomores in the NHL who have played some fantastic hockey this season in varying roles. Some are playing on the fourth line, some are starting goaltenders, some are playing first pairing minutes. There's a wide variety of talents on today's show. In the first segment, we'll be looking at Dustin Wolf of the Calgary Flames, who has been fantastic this season. One of my favorite netminders in the prospecting world over the past 5 years is finally coming into his own in the NHL and has deserved a lot more Calder attention than he's gotten so far this season. In the second segment, we'll be moving on to the Anaheim Ducks by highlighting Jackson LaCombe and Cutter Gauthier, who've both been playing some really good minutes this year. Jackson LaCombe really growing into a first pairing defender, while Cutter Gauthier has settled into a really good two-way middle six piece there in Anaheim this season. And in the final segment, we'll be wrapping up the show by highlighting the bottom 6 performances of Emil Heinman of the Montreal Canadiens and Mackie Samoskevich of the Florida Panthers. So a lot to dig into in today's show, a lot of very interesting prospects who I've been watching for quite a few seasons at this point, and guys that are really shining now in their respective roles in the NHL and who are getting attention from their own fan bases, but perhaps league-wide are still a little bit more unknown than they should be at this stage, because they've been very, very effective to great NHLers so far in their young careers. So let's just dig into the first segment here with Dustin Wolf of the Calgary Flames, because boy, oh boy, has he been fantastic. He dropped in the draft all the way to the 7th round in 2019, where the Calgary Flames snapped him up at 214th overall. That is late on draft day. He was the 4th last player selected in the draft. And I think the Calgary Flames are pretty happy with how that 7th round selection is turning out to be. And he fell because he is an undersized netminder, right? 6 feet, 174 pounds. That is a small frame for a goaltender, but his numbers, even in the draft year, were so good. Even going back to his draft -1 season, his rookie year in the WHL with the Everett Silvertips, he only played 20 games. We had a .928 save percentage. Then in his draft year, he played 61 games, had a 41-15-4 record, and a .936 save percentage. Those are numbers that should get a goaltender selected easily top 64 in the NHL draft, but the undersized frame hurt him. The fact that he was playing on a dominant team didn't help either in terms of setting him apart from his peers, but he continued to dominate at the WHL level, then moved on to dominating the AHL in consecutive seasons. Over a 3-year span, he put up .924, .932, and .922 save percentages in the AHL for the Stockton Heat and then the Calgary Wranglers after they moved. And now he's made his full-time leap to the NHL. Last year, he did get some minutes later on in the season, playing 17 games and sporting an .893 save percentage. But this season, on a resurging Calgary Flames team that's been winning more games than they were expected to, largely due to Dustin Wolf, he has a .915 save percentage in 38 games, is 22-12-4 as a record, is just coming off of a shutout against the Montreal Canadiens in a 1-0 victory, and has been integral to every single win that Calgary has gotten this season, because the Flames haven't been scoring all that many goals in terms of supporting the netminder all that consistently this campaign, but Dustin Wolf has kept the Flames in games reliably all season long and has been such a difference-making factor. But because netminders aren't as flashy as high-producing either offensive defensemen like Lane Hutson or potential franchise centerman like Macklin Celebrini, he hasn't gotten quite as much Calder attention this season, and that includes from this very podcast. We've definitely talked more about the Hutsons and Celebrinis of the world than Dustin Wolf this campaign, but we have been talking about Dustin Wolf for as long as we've been doing this podcast, and he's a prospect that both myself and former co-host Hattie Kalakash have been in love with for a really long time, and that boils down to his intelligence, his reflexes, and his athleticism. This is a goaltender who is able to compensate for his lack of size and the lack of just physical space he takes up in net by just consistently getting his eyes on pucks through traffic. He's not looking over traffic because, again, he's not over 6 feet tall, but he still is able to track pucks extremely well at the NHL level. Beyond just tracking pucks, his reflexes under pressure and reflexes to deflections has also left me impressed all season long. It's always been a strength for him throughout his development, but seeing it happen at the NHL level is certainly another step in his development. And those desperation saves that he hasn't had to make too often this season because, again, he's a very composed netminder who likes to stay in a squared position rather than overcompensate for any desperation plays. But when the situation calls for it, goaltenders have to make those. And Wolf has been really, really solid in those situations this year. And beyond that, I have also been very impressed with how he's been able to rebound from poor performances, how he's able to compose himself for third periods if it's a tie game or nursing a 1-0 lead. This is a goaltender who gets better when the pressure rises, and that's something I think that bodes just so incredibly well for the Calgary Flames moving forward with this franchise netminder. He's only 23 years of age. He's turning 24 in just a month's time. Still a very young netminder, has a decade plus of career left ahead of him, and should be in Calgary for a very long time because this is the kind of player to build around in terms of how he reads the game. He's a really special goaltender, and having so consistently been able to not only win hockey games, but do so in spectacular form with great consistency, excellent numbers, and doing so in an undersized frame while always having that adversity of being questioned for being an undersized netminder and pushing through it nonetheless. Dustin Wolf is a player that has pushed through adversity his entire career and just consistently dominated despite it, which is something that I think every Calgary Flames fan is looking at this season and projecting a very, very exciting career because this is certainly, I think, in terms of long-term netminders in Calgary, this is the most exciting one that we've seen in a very long time. Of course, Jacob Markstrom was there for quite a couple seasons now, but he was acquired in free agency as an older goaltender. But in terms of developing in-house, Dustin Wolf is the best that Calgary has produced in well over a decade. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below what your thoughts have been on Dustin Wolf's rookie season. Is this a goaltender deserving of a significant Calder push? Because in my eyes, this kind of production in an NHL where shooting percentages are rising, save percentages are decreasing, putting up a .915 on the Calgary Flames this season, who haven't been the most consistent team in terms of being reliable defensively or scoring goals night in, night out. Dustin Wolf has been such a stabilizing factor for this lineup that's a difference-making factor that very few other rookies can compete with. I think Lane Hutson playing number 1, number 2 minutes in Montreal and putting up, 0.8 points a game so far this year and just transforming how the Habs play in transition is definitely a pretty big contender. And of course, Celebrini is playing a massive role on the first line in San Jose. But Dustin Wolf has the benefit here of having currently dragged his team into a playoff spot. They are far from having entrenched that position this season, but he's doing his best to keep them in that race. And if they do reach the Stanley Cup playoffs, the arguments in favor of Dustin Wolf are only going to increase because he has been just so steady, so reliable, And to do so in his rookie campaign as a netminder is beyond impressive, something that we haven't seen very often in the last decade in the National Hockey League. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to be exploring the games of Jackson LaCombe and Cutter Gauthier of the Anaheim Ducks, who have been excelling in very different roles. Of course, one as a defenseman and one as a forward, but both taking their games to the next level this season. So all that and more after these messages from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feeling fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every single shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, starting off with Jackson LaCombe of the Anaheim Ducks. Ducks fans, perk your ears up. We've got a full 10-minute segment here just on your young players. But LaCombe's a player that I've really admired for quite a couple of seasons now, going back to his sophomore NCAA season at the University of Minnesota. This is a player that the Anaheim Ducks selected in the second round in 2019 at 39th overall out of the USHS prep circuit. So he was drafted out of high school, having only dressed for 3 USHL games in his draft year campaign, and then immediately making the jump to the NCAA thereafter. He needed 1 year of adjustment at the NCAA level, playing third pairing minutes and being relatively limited in terms of offensive impact, but really got going as a sophomore, which is when I tuned into his game in 2020 and 2021, where he also played at the World Junior Championships for Team USA in a depth capacity. But he was basically a point-a-game scorer from the blue line for his 3 final seasons at the University of Minnesota. But what he brought beyond just production was very projectable transition habits. He's a real puck mover with fantastic mobility who changes angles proactively, is constantly trying to move the puck up the ice, and has a pretty diverse arsenal of tools to help him do that. Whether it's the pure passing ability, the deception, the mobility, but also the handling skill can open up a lot of passing lanes for him. And he's become a really selective passer and breakout specialist in the NHL this season. This year, in his sophomore campaign with the Anaheim Ducks, last season, he made the team out of camp and played 71 games, scoring 17 points. But this season, he's moved up the depth chart, especially with that trade of Cam Fowler, and in 56 games has scored 11 goals and 34 points. And in his last 10 games, he has 2 goals and 10 points, playing 24, 26, 24 minutes a night, averaging around the 24 mark in his last 10 games, and just playing a massive role there for the Anaheim Ducks, using his mobility to contain play off the rush defensively. He's a really proactive stick-first defender as well in his own zone at 6'2", 205 pounds. He also has a decent enough weight to put behind his frame to protect the net front, clear players out, and overall just clear his goaltender sightlines. And he's been a really important piece for Lukas Dostal in net this season in terms of doing the things that goaltenders appreciate the very most from their defensemen. And of course, in the breakout, he's been a very, very impactful piece. But of course, on the power play, he's playing these big minutes now later on in the season, and has been really, really dynamic piece there for the Anaheim Ducks on the man advantage. His feet constantly changing angles, has worked really proactively with Anaheim's more dynamic offensive threats. And he's a player that can also very fluidly interchange with forwards in the offensive zone, and is just a very modern defenseman by these standards, which gives the Anaheim Ducks the utter luxury of having 3 fantastic modern and mobile defensemen on their blue line with Jackson LaCombe, Olen Zellweger, and Pavel Mintyukov. Those are 3 defensemen that should all be playing top 4 minutes for a very long time. They're all left shots, so one of them has to be playing on their offside longer term, but I think at least one of them is going to be more than comfortable to do so, and there is a lot to look forward to on the blue line in Anaheim because the talent is almost unparalleled across the NHL, and Jackson LaCombe has been a big piece of that this season. But speaking of being a big piece of the team this season, Cutter Gauthier was expected to be a big top six piece out of the gate, and he took a little bit of time to get going, but he really has started to ramp it up here in the back half of the campaign. He has 3 goals and 8 points in his last 10 games, so he's up to 12 goals and 30 points in 63 games on the season, which I think in terms of production, playing mainly 13, 14 minutes a night. He's been primarily playing in a third line capacity for the Anaheim Ducks. That is more than fair in terms of production. And in terms of his recent stretch, that point of game stretch has all come in those same third line minutes. He hasn't been promoted and is still finding a way onto the score sheet on quite a few nights now through the month of February and into March. So a lot to look forward to with Cutter Gauthier, who's been constantly using his shot at the NHL level, but just hasn't been finding the back of the net all that often this season. It's starting to come a bit more now in the back half, but he's a player whose shooting percentage is definitely going to be higher next season, if you were to ask me, than it's been so far this campaign, because the power, the velocity, the accuracy of his shot are all fantastic, and he's just not had that puck luck this year. He's hit quite a few posts. He's gotten unlucky and tight, but still a player with a lot of goal scoring upside. But on the flip side, I think what's going to really grow his game the very most now in the NHL, because the goal scoring is going to come. It's mostly luck now, I think, and just overall experience and that next level of pace that's going to be the deciding factor. What's going to grow his game the very most and make him just a plug and play, versatile top six piece for the Anaheim Ducks for the next decade plus is the playmaking portion of his game. The give and goes, the ability to use his shot as a playmaking tool. These are aspects of his game that he's still starting to explore in the NHL. That's going to open up a lot more space and opportunities for his teammates, and in doing so, also going to make defenders bite on the pass more often, opening up shooting threats. So you're going to see the goal total rise up if the playmaking gets a boost there as well. So that's something I would look out for with Cutter Gauthier in terms of the playmaking still needing a little bit of tinkering and a little bit of work. That, I think, is a primary reason why he's not yet a substantial top six piece in Anaheim this season. But once he gets going on the playmaking side, once he's able to reach that level of pace in terms of connective plays off the rush and off the cycle, I think that he's going to be a real top six player in Anaheim, and has been playing some really solid bottom six hockey here in the past couple months, deserving a lot more praise than he's gotten here so far this season, because I think the early season disappointment with the lack of production maybe cast a shadow on the rest of his campaign. But in terms of the recent viewings, he has been really, really fun to watch and impactful whenever he's been on the ice for the Anaheim Ducks, playing responsible defensive minutes on top of bringing that goal-scoring threat. But that wraps up the second segment. In the final one, we'll be talking about Mackie Samoskevich of the Florida Panthers and Emil Heinman of the Montreal Canadiens. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every single week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I recently tried their Protein Plus meals, and they were absolutely packed with flavor, kept me fueled all day long, and were just so easy to prepare. The convenience is just unbeatable. No prep, no mess, and great food in just a couple minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, highlighting the game of 2 wingers that I've really loved watching play this season, both playing in the division that I watch the most in the Atlantic. The Montreal Canadiens, of course, have Emil Heinman, who's been a great fourth-line glue guy, and has a fantastic record with the Montreal Canadiens this season. Their winning stretches have almost exclusively come with him in the lineup, playing with Yoel Armia and Jake Evans in a quote-unquote fourth line, playing physically engaged hockey in all three zones. He hasn't scored any points in his last 10 games, but has still found a way to become impactful throughout that stretch. He had a great scoring run before that. Throughout December, he was at almost a point-a-game run over a 10-game stretch, scoring goals and setting up assists, especially for Jake Evans when he was scoring at a near goal a game pace there for a while. But Heineman, what he's been doing with the Habs, has been creating a bunch of space through physicality, bringing constant energy on the forecheck. He's been just so difficult to play against in terms of his frame. He's 6'2", almost 200 pounds, but plays heavier than he is, and has been just a wrecking ball on the forecheck. But on top of that, in terms of his one-touch playmaking, his ability to catch pucks, a lot of fluidity has grown in this game over the course of the past couple of seasons that has made things that were previously a bit choppy in his game in terms of retrieving pucks, catching pucks, moving into goal scoring positions, and then getting shots off on goal. That used to be quite clunky in terms of how he functioned in the offensive zone and how his puck skills interacted. But at this stage for the Montreal Canadiens, he's become a decent one-touch playmaker. The ability to catch and release pucks in a split second has become a real strength in his game beyond just being a league average tool. And on top of that, in terms of defensive zone physicality, engagement, aggressiveness in terms of his stick habits, there's a lot to like in Emil Heineman's game. And he has 17 points, including 10 goals in 48 games this season. He's gotten some looks on the second power play there for the Montreal Canadiens, but has really not played anywhere apart from that fourth line this season. And as a 23-year-old rookie, I think it's been a really, really good display for the young Swedish forward, because the way he plays the game of hockey is going to translate to a long NHL career, in my opinion. Whether the scoring is able to pop to a middle six NHL level or not in the future remains to be seen. But what he's shown to this stage has been a physical dominance, an ability to score in tight, but more than anything, just supportive habits off puck, the checking habits that you need from your bottom six players in the modern NHL. And that, I think, is going to lead to a long and prosperous career. And I know that Habs fans have already fallen in love with how he plays the game of hockey and noticed just how important he is to this team. He's a real glue guy. He brings the team together on the ice and scores really clutch goals. When he scores a goal, it's more often than not a very important one. But let's move on to the final player of today's episode, who I believe deserves a little bit more recognition for his play so far this season, and that is Mackie Samoskevich of the Florida Panthers, selected in the first round, 24th overall in 2021. Such a highly intelligent, skilled, speedy player that I loved watching in his draft year campaign for the Chicago Steel, where he combined for dynamic offensive sequences with fellow NHL rookie Matthew Coronato, who's also been very good this season for the Calgary Flames. But it was always Mackie Samoskevich's intelligence, creativity, handling skill, and speed that created the offense. Coronato was finishing the chances. He was scoring so many goals, but Samoskevich was the creator, the setup man. And that, I mean, he didn't score more than 13 goals in that campaign either in 36 games. He was a real playmaking specialist. And I think that this season, what we've seen with Samoskevich has been a little bit of an inverse of that. He's really grown his off-puck goal scoring since his draft year campaign, through his University of Michigan career, to playing with the Charlotte Checkers last season, putting up 54 points in 62 games. This is a player who has grown into an NHL kind of style. Samoskevich had a lot of junior habits in his draft year campaign, being an undersized, speedy center, but he's added a lot of lower body strength. He's become a lot more explosive from a standstill, and he's been a lot more resistant to contact as well. He's not a player that's going to initiate contact all that much, but he's a speedy, evasive, creative player. And the routes he's been taking in terms of finding space and finding dangerous chances for the Florida Panthers, while playing mainly bottom 6 minutes for the first half of the year and now working his way up into a second line capacity for the Florida Panthers, it's been a really good jump in his game, and the goal scoring has been the thing that has popped the very most while playing up the lineup with higher skilled players. He's able to find gaps in coverage. He has refined supportive habits off puck in terms of consistently being open as a passing option through transition, but also in the offensive zone, and just constantly prodding at defensive structures, finding soft ice, keeping his feet moving, working hard, and also allowing his puck skills to shine rather than trying to dangle through entire defenses. It's evolved into a more pragmatic approach where he's trying to solve problems as they arise rather than seeking them out and seeking challenges to solve with his puck handling, which was definitely a bit of a trait he had in his draft year campaign. So a player who's maturing, growing in his goal scoring. Is up to 11 goals and 21 points this season in 55 games, has 4 goals and 5 points in his last 10. Again, playing up to 17 minutes some nights for the Florida Panthers, and player I think is in a wonderful situation on such a competitive team in Florida, playing alongside very skilled players, whether he's playing on the third line or the second, doesn't really matter. There's skill throughout that lineup, but he's been a big part of that this season, bring a bunch of value to the equation for the Florida Panthers and being an unheralded member of that team outside the Florida market this season. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do leave us a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about the episode here today. What are your thoughts on these 5 young NHL talents? Do you think Dustin Wolf deserves the Calder? Who did I miss? Who is a standout young NHLer that I have overlooked this season? Please do let me know in the comments down below. But that wraps things up here for us today. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and I hope that you tune back in very, very soon.